Veronica's grief lasted exactly as long as it took the lawyer to say the words, $15 million. She dabbed her dry eyes, while my stepsister, Brittany, smirked at her own $5 million check. Then, the lawyer looked at me. For Maya, he said, passing me a dusty, yellowed envelope. The room went silent. Brittany laughed. She asked if it was a coupon for a soup kitchen. I didn't respond. I just tore the seal. Inside was a single phone number. I dialed it right there, in front of them all. A deep voice answered immediately. I have been waiting for your call. Air, if you were handed a mystery envelope while everyone else got millions, would you open it right there or wait until you were alone? Tell me in the comments what you'd do. I hung up the phone. The deep voice on the other end was gone. But the single word echoed in my mind. Hair. I looked up. The library was buzzing again. They had already moved on from me. To them, I was just background noise. A static glitch in their perfect afternoon of inheriting millions. I turned to the heavy oak doors. I just wanted fresh air. I wanted to process the impossible thing I had just heard. But Veronica wasn't done. She couldn't let me leave with just a mystery. She needed to make sure I left with a burden. She stepped in front of the exit, blocking my path with the practiced grace of a woman who owns the room. She held a slip of paper in her manicured hand. It wasn't a sealed envelope like mine. It was crisp, white, and unfolded. An invoice. Maya, she said. Her voice was pitched perfectly, loud enough for the lawyers and the lingering guests to hear, but soft enough to feign affection. Before you rush off. She smoothed the paper against her designer dress. Since Arthur didn't leave you any assets to manage, Brittany and I thought it would be good for you to have some responsibility, a contribution to the family legacy, so you don't feel left out. She pressed the paper into my hand. I looked down. It was the bill for the funeral catering, the lobster tails, the champagne, the imported cheese they were currently stuffing into their faces while mocking my grandfather's memory. The total due was $12,450. I stood there, staring at the number. $12,000. That was my entire savings account. That was 6 months of rent. Consider it your rent for the last 20 years. She whispered, leaning in close so only I could smell the expensive Chardonnay on her breath. Pay it by Monday. Now. You might be wondering why I took it. Why didn't I crumble the paper and throw it in her face? Why didn't I scream? It is a question people always ask when they see the scapegoat take the hit. Why do you stay? Why do you accept it? There is a concept in biology that explains my silence better than I ever could. It is called the boiling frog effect. If you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, it will fight. It will jump. It will do anything to survive. But if you put that same frog in a pot of cold water and turn the heat up, degree by degree, the frog doesn't move. It adjusts its body temperature to match the heat. It accepts the new reality as normal. It cooks to death without ever realizing it is dying. I was the frog. For 20 years, Veronica had been turning up the heat. A snide comment about my clothes when I was 12. A stolen birthday gift when I was 16. Being treated like an unpaid servant during my college years. By the time she handed me a $12,000 bill for a party where I wasn't even allowed to eat the food, my skin was already burned off. I didn't feel the heat anymore. I just felt the familiarity of the pain. It was muscle memory to be the doormat. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I folded the invoice and put it in my pocket. Right next to the yellow envelope. 2 pieces of paper. One was a debt I didn't owe. The other was a secret they couldn't even imagine. I walked out of the Blackwood estate and into the gray afternoon rain. My hands were trembling. But not from fear. They were shaking because for the first time in my life, I realized the water was boiling. And I was finally ready to jump out. The First National Bank didn't look like a place for secrets. It looked like a place for checking accounts and lollipops. But Mr. Sterling led me past the tellers, past the loan officers, and down a flight of marble stairs that felt like descending into a tomb. The air down there was cooler, smelling of old paper and copper pennies. He unlocked a private viewing room and placed a heavy metal box on the table. He didn't waste time with small talk. He opened the box and slid a stack of documents toward me. They weren't cash. They were heavy, bonded paper with gold seals. I read the top page. Articles of incorporation for the Blackwood Holding Company. I flipped to the next page. A deed for the commercial land in downtown Newport. Another deed for the grazing lands in the north. And finally, the deed for the land sitting directly under the Blackwood estate. I looked up at him, confused. I asked him what this meant. I asked him if Grandpa wanted me to file these. Mr. Sterling smiled. A small, sad expression. He told me I wasn't there to file them. He told me I was there to own them. He explained that, 3 years ago, Arthur transferred the controlling interest of the holding company into a blind trust. And at 9 this morning, upon the reading of the will, that trust dissolved. The beneficiary was me. I stared at the papers. Veronica got the mansion. Brittany got the cash. But I got the empire. I owned the company that owned the land. I was their landlord. But the joy didn't hit me. The anger did. If he loved me enough to leave me everything, why did he leave me alone for 20 years? Why did he let Veronica treat me like a servant in his own house? Mr. Sterling seemed to anticipate the question. He reached into the box and pulled out a small digital recorder. He pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the small room. Raspy and weak. Recorded just weeks before he died. Maya, he said, I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I was a coward. I let Veronica push me around because I was too old and too tired to fight her daily wars. I watched her treat you like furniture. And I bit my tongue. There was a pause on the tape. The sound of him breathing, but I knew if I gave you this money while I was alive, she would have found a way to take it. She would have tied it up in court, claimed I was senile, or bullied you into signing it over. So, I had to play the long game. I had to let the weeds choke themselves out. I needed Veronica and Brittany to prove exactly who they were. I needed them to squander their allowances and show their incompetence, so that when this transfer hit, no judge in the world would grant them stewardship. I stayed silent so you could be bulletproof. The recording ended. The silence in the vault was heavy. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been building a fortress around me, brick by brick, in the dark. He sacrificed his relationship with me to ensure my future. I touched the cool metal of the safety deposit box. I wasn't just a scapegoat anymore. I was a sleeper agent. I signed the final transfer papers with a steady hand. Mr. Sterling handed me a heavy iron key. He told me the accounts were active immediately. He told me I could evict them today if I wanted to. I looked at the key. No. I said, not today. Today, they are celebrating. I want to wait until the party is over. I want to wait until the bill comes due. I walked out of the bank with $250 million in assets, and a secret that was going to burn their world to the ground. I didn't storm the castle. I went back to the guest cottage at the edge of the estate, unlocked the door, and made a cup of tea. To Veronica and Brittany. I was just the defeated stepdaughter who had scurried back to her hole. To me, I was the undercover boss conducting a hostile takeover from the inside. I stopped being a victim the moment I walked out of that bank vault. I became an auditor, and my family became my audit subjects. I utilized the silence they loved so much against them. They ignored me, which meant they never saw me watching. I treated their financial lives like a balance sheet that didn't add up. I started tracking their burn rate. Month 1 was the renovation phase. Veronica decided the $15 million estate needed a facelift. She hired contractors to rip out the kitchen counters and replace them with Italian marble. She spent $400,000 on antique rugs and gold leaf molding. I watched the trucks roll in from my window. I watched her scream at the workers for being too loud. I didn't say a word. I just logged the expenses in my mental ledger. Every time she signed a check for a new fixture, she was increasing the value of my asset. She was renovating a house she held the title to. But she was upgrading land she had no right to occupy. Month 3 was Brittany's turn. She decided she was going to be a lifestyle brand. She spent $50,000 on a launch party for a skincare line that didn't have a formula yet. She bought 70,000 fake followers to boost her engagement metrics. I sat in the corner of the room during her live streams, holding her ring light while she talked about hustle culture. She thought I was being a supportive, submissive sister. She didn't know I was calculating her return on investment, which was exactly 0. I marked a date on the calendar in my kitchen. Based on their spending habits and the limited liquidity of the cash Brittany inherited, combined with the upkeep costs of the mansion Veronica was now solely responsible for, I calculated their insolvency date. They weren't just spending the interest. They were devouring the principal. It was a simple math problem. You cannot sustain a champagne lifestyle on a finite beer budget, no matter how big the keg looks at the start. I watched them bleed money. I watched them posture and preen, completely unaware that the clock on the wall was ticking down to 0. They were dancing on a trap door, and I was the one holding the lever. I just had to wait for the red ink to hit the bottom line. 3 months later, the notification on my phone wasn't a text message. It was a calendar alert. Projected insolvency date. I was sitting across from Veronica at the Gilded Lily, the most exclusive lunch spot in Newport. She wasn't there to eat, she was there to perform. She was holding court with the ladies' auxiliary, laughing too loudly about her plans to winter in Gstaad. She ordered a $300 bottle of Sancerre for the table without even looking at the wine list. She was projecting the image of a dowager countess. But I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her hands shook slightly when she reached for her water. She checked her phone compulsively. Not for messages, but for bank alerts she was praying wouldn't appear. The bill arrived on a silver tray. Veronica snatched it up with a flourish, dropping her platinum card onto the velvet without glancing at the total. She kept talking, describing the new marble in her foyer, until the waiter returned. He didn't leave the tray. He leaned down, his voice a professional whisper that carried like a scream in the silent restaurant. "I am terribly sorry, ma'am." The card was declined. The silence that followed was absolute. The other women looked at their salads. Veronica turned the color of ash. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, her voice pitching up. "Run it again. It's a chip error. It happens all the time. I tried 3 times. And ma'am, it's a hard decline. Do you have another form of payment?" She didn't. I knew she didn't because I knew the balances of her secondary accounts were hovering in the double digits. I watched her fumble through her purse, pretending to look for another card she knew wasn't there. This is the thing about narcissists and money. For normal people, money is currency. It buys groceries. It pays rent. It's a tool. But for people like Veronica, money isn't something they have. It is who they are. It is their skin. When that card declined, it wasn't a financial error to her. It was a glitch in her reality. It was an existential threat. Without the ability to pay, she ceased to exist as the person she claimed to be. She was staring into the void of her own irrelevance. And it terrified her more than death. I let her dangle for exactly 10 seconds. I watched the sweat bead on her upper lip. Then, I reached into my purse. "I'll get it, Veronica," I said smoothly, handing my plain debit card to the waiter. "You probably just tripped the fraud alert with that deposit on the ski chalet." The lie was a lifeline, and she grabbed it with desperate claws. "Yes," she breathed, composing herself instantly. Yes. The fraud department is so aggressive these days. Thank you. Maya. I'll Venmo you. She wouldn't. We both knew that. She smiled at her friends, the mask back in place. But her eyes were darting around the room, manic and calculating. She needed cash. And she needed it fast. She couldn't sell the house yet, that would admit defeat. She needed a windfall. On the drive home, she was silent, tapping furiously on the dashboard. Then, she turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a new, predatory light. We should host a gala, she said. A charity auction at the estate. We have so many old antiques in storage. Things Arthur never cared about. We can auction them off for the Family Heritage Foundation. The Family Heritage Foundation? I asked. I didn't know we had one. We will, by tomorrow, she said. We act as the administrators. We take a management fee. It's perfectly legal. It wasn't perfectly legal. It was fraud. She was planning to sell assets she didn't own, assets that belonged to the holding company. Which meant they belonged to me, and pocket the cash under the guise of charity. That sounds brilliant. Veronica, I said. You should definitely do it. Invite everyone. Make it the event of the season. She nodded, satisfied that her dull stepdaughter was falling in line. She didn't realize I wasn't agreeing to a party. I was agreeing to the venue for her execution. The Blackwood Charity Gala was a masterclass in deception. Veronica had transformed the ballroom into a hall of mirrors, literally, crystal chandeliers reflected off gilded mirrors, multiplying the crowd of 300 wealthy donors until the room felt like a claustrophobic kaleidoscope of diamonds and tuxedos. I moved through the crowd in my black server's uniform, holding a tray of champagne flutes. I was invisible. To them, I was just a pair of hands delivering alcohol. To Veronica, I was a prop, a visual reminder of her dominance. She had insisted I work the event, claiming they were short-staffed. But we both knew the truth. She wanted the elite of Newport to see Arthur Blackwood's granddaughter serving them drinks while she stood on the podium. I watched her take the stage. She looked magnificent in emerald silk, the microphone in her hand like a scepter. Brittany stood beside her, live streaming to her bought and paid-for audience, smiling that vacant, practiced smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Veronica cooed, her voice amplified through the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight is about legacy. It is about preserving the history of the Blackwood estate. And to do that, I am offering something truly special. The deed to the Blackwood Guest House. A murmur went through the crowd. The guest house was a historic landmark in its own right. Bidding starts at $2 million, she announced. All proceeds go to the Family Heritage Foundation. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me near the back wall. She smiled. A predator spotting a wounded animal. Oh, Maya, she called out, interrupting the auctioneer. Be a dear and bring more champagne to the front table. Some of us serve the family legacy. And some of us, well, some of us just serve. The crowd laughed. It was a polite, cruel titter that rippled through the room. That laughter was the signal. I didn't move toward the table. I reached into my apron pocket and touched the transmitter for my headset. I had linked it to the main PA system 3 hours ago. I bid $0. I said. My voice didn't sound like a whisper. It boomed through the speakers, louder and clearer than Veronica's. The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of vacuum that happens right before an explosion. Every head turned toward me. Veronica frowned, shielding her eyes against the spotlight. Maya? Your microphone is on. You're embarrassing yourself. I bid $0. I repeated, walking slowly toward the stage. I didn't walk like a server. I walked like an auditor entering a crime scene. Because you cannot auction stolen property. Veronica. Security, she hissed, gesturing wildly. Get her out of here. She's having a breakdown. One keystroke. I said calmly. I pressed the button on the remote concealed in my palm. The massive projection screen behind Veronica, which had been displaying a flattering photo of the guest house, flickered. The image vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. It was high definition, cruel in its clarity. This is the ledger for the Family Heritage Foundation, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. As you can see, 90% of the donations are automatically routed to a private account in the Cayman Islands. An account listed solely in the name of Veronica Blackwood. The crowd gasped. It wasn't a theatrical gasp. It was the sound of 300 socialites realizing they were accessories to fraud. Lies! Veronica screamed, her composure cracking like cheap glass. She hacked the system. She's jealous. She's unstable. I pressed the button again. A new document appeared. This one was old, yellowed, and undeniable. It was the document from the safety deposit box. This is the article of incorporation for the Blackwood Holding Company, I narrated, pointing a laser pointer at the signature line. Grandpa Arthur transferred 100% of the company assets to a blind trust 3 years ago. The sole beneficiary of that trust is me. I stepped onto the stage. Veronica backed away, hitting the podium. Brittany had stopped live streaming. She was staring at the screen, her mouth open. I own the company. Veronica. The company owns the guest house. It owns the champagne you're drinking. It owns the microphone you're holding. You are trying to sell my property to pay off your credit card debt. Veronica looked at the crowd. Then, back at me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She grabbed the microphone stand. You own the company? Fine, take the business. I don't care, but this house, she stamped her foot on the stage floor. This mansion was left to me in the will. Specifically, the house is mine. You can't touch it. I am the lady of this house. She looked triumphant. She thought she had found the loophole. She thought she had won on a technicality. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in that house in 20 years. You are absolutely right, I said softly. The will gave you the structure. The bricks. The wood. The marble you just installed. You own the house. I pressed the button one last time. A final document filled the screen. It was a map of the estate, with the land highlighted in red. But you should have read Clause 4 of the property deed. I said, the Blackwood Mansion sits on land owned by the holding company. It is a 99-year ground lease. I looked at her, dead in the eye. That lease expired at midnight last night. I own the dirt, Veronica. And as the CEO of the holding company, I have decided not to renew your lease. I checked my watch. You are currently trespassing on corporate property. You have 30 minutes to remove your personal effects before I lock the gates. And Veronica? Don't take the towels. The company owns those too. The security team didn't need to be called. They were already there, waiting in the wings. I had hired them 3 hours before the gala began. They stepped out of the shadows. Large men in dark suits who didn't care about Veronica's pedigree or Brittany's subscriber count. Veronica tried to cling to the podium, screaming about her rights, about squatters, about how I was an ungrateful parasite. But rights are legal constructs. And legally, she was nothing more than an intruder. 2 guards flanked her, guiding her firmly toward the exit. She looked back at the crowd, desperate for a savior. But the 300 guests were too busy deleting their bids and texting their lawyers to make eye contact. Brittany tried one last Hail Mary. She held her phone up, streaming the eviction live. Guys, you are witnessing theft. My stepsister is literally stealing our home right now. Send help. I glanced at the screen projected behind me. which was still mirroring her feed. The comments were scrolling by in a blur of speed. They weren't sending help. They were typing L, owned, and pay your bills. I stood on the balcony of the Blackwood estate and watched their taillights disappear down the long, winding driveway. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for that old, familiar voice that told me I was being too harsh, that I should have been the bigger person. But the voice didn't come. The only thing I felt was the cool night air and the silence. It was a clean, heavy silence. The silence of a ledger that finally balanced. 6 months later, the Blackwood estate doesn't look like a museum anymore. The Italian marble Veronica installed is gone, replaced by functional, modern workspaces. The ballroom where she tried to sell my property is now a conference center. The sign on the gate no longer says private residence. It reads, Blackwood Forensic Auditing. I sit at Grandpa Arthur's desk. It is a massive piece of mahogany, but I don't feel small behind it. On the wall, in a simple black frame, hangs the yellow envelope. It reminds me every day that value isn't loud. Power doesn't need to scream. I open the leather binder in front of me. It contains the applications for the first annual Arthur Blackwood Grant. It is a fund designed to help women trapped in financial abuse recover their assets and their dignity. I pick up my pen. I don't sign with a tremble. I sign with the steady hand of a CEO who knows exactly what her signature is worth. Veronica and Brittany are still out there. Somewhere. I hear rumors. Veronica is living in a small condo in Florida, telling anyone who will listen that she was the victim of a corporate coup. Brittany is trying to pivot to budget travel content. I don't check up on them. I don't audit their lives anymore. They are bad investments. And I have written them off. I was the invisible librarian. I was the scapegoat. I was the heir who got nothing but a phone number. But today, I am the architect of my own life. I built this empire on the ashes of their arrogance. And I built it to last. Maya turned a yellow envelope into an empire. If you have ever had to build your success in silence while others took the credit, hit that like button. Share this story with the quiet one in your life who needs to know their time is coming. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you are secretly building right now?